If you're looking for a community to accompany you in your leadership journey, you should join our Savvy Supervisors Facebook group. Insights and videos, supports, great group discussions, and weekly themes to help you hone your leadership skills, all for free. You can find it at savvysupervisors.com. That will take you directly to the Facebook page. And if you're interested in finding out more about our supervisory leadership course, which is our signature course and has been used with over 100 companies with amazing results, you can check that out at supervisoryleadership.co. That's supervisoryleadership.co.
Welcome to the Culture and Leadership Podcast with my esteemed guest, physician, owner, and managing partner of HK Med Aesthetics, Dr. Hal Kurlander. Dr. Hal Kurlander grew up on Long Island, New York, and attended the University of Pennsylvania. He received a BA in psychology there and then went on to medical school at the Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, Texas. After he received his degree and became an official doctor, he had an internship in internal medicine and neurology, and then he joined a group practice in neurology from 1982 to 1990. Following that, he had 17 years of solo practice in neurology with a specialization in movement disorders like Parkinson's disease, for example. In the last 10 years of his career, he has been pursuing the same areas of study as a senior partner with another group practice. And after 35 years of clinical neurology, he is now semi-retired and working in the area of facial aesthetics, regional medical spas and clinics. Dr. Kurlander's wife was called Helene, and they were married in 1974. And she was a loving companion and partner for 31 years, but sadly passed away in 2005. He has two brilliant children, Michael and Clifford, who are in their 30s. Both are married to wonderful women. One lives in Victoria, British Columbia, and the other in Atlanta, Georgia. So welcome, and thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you, Marie. I'm pleased to be here.
That was the official and professional bio, but how about you fill us in a little bit on your personal explanation about who you are?
Well, who I am is a composite of a lot of things. All those experiences growing up on Long Island, New York, my time in Philadelphia at the University of Pennsylvania, moving here to Houston, which was both wonderful and traumatic, and then growing up further here and spending been here really the bulk of my life. So that's molded a great deal of my character. Your character, of course, changes not just because of the places you are, but because of the people you meet. And I've certainly had lots of different experiences with lots of different people that have all been incorporated into my own behavior patterns.
And you have had quite a lot of experience with managing staff in different medical institutions and in practices. Running sort of from a leadership perspective, being in charge of people and also lots of, patient interactions too. Very diverse patient interactions, haven't you?
Many thousands of patient interactions. In solo practice, of course, I was the owner and sole manager of the practice and had to learn a great deal about administration, which I knew precious little. My business education was sorely lacking. So I had to learn on the fly by the seat of my pants. For 17 years, I ran that practice, and then just because of the financial pressures being put on us by insurance companies and government regulation, it became necessary to join up with a group. So I joined with a group of physicians with whom I was already sharing call. So it was really a very easy transition. And the last 10 years of my practice in neurology, I spent with that group as a senior partner. And since then, I've been on my own, solo again, just doing facial aesthetics, Botox and dermal fillers. That's the last 2.5 years.
And when we spoke earlier, I was really interested in what the relationship was between doing neurology and movement disorders and then moving to cosmetic surgery. Like, to me, it seemed like there was no connection, but you explained really nicely what the connection was. Would you mind sharing that with the audience?
As a movement disorder specialist, I treated many different conditions, Parkinson's certainly being one of them, but we also treated a group of conditions called dystonias. eye spasms, facial spasms, abnormal neck movements, arm and leg abnormalities and spasticity. The main and most effective treatment of these conditions is Botox, botulinum toxin, which we inject into very specific muscles at high doses. So I did that for 17 years, and well, actually about 15 years, and then the last 2 years doing cosmetic. But I started doing the cosmetic portion about 12 years ago. It was a very easy transition because I knew all the facial muscles and I knew how everything worked. So it was easy to do cosmetic or Botox injections. About 5 or 6 years ago, I incorporated dermal fillers, expanding the cosmetic aspect of practice. So at that point, I was doing more and more cosmetic and trying to do less and less clinical. It was easy to discontinue doing all the clinical work, the neurology work, and simply continue the cosmetic portion.
And because you had such a sophisticated understanding of the face and the neck and the shoulders, probably very few physicians who wouldn't have had a background in movement disorders would even come close to what you understand about the face and the neck.
I would say that, yeah, most likely that's correct. Other movement disorder specialists, of course, have the same knowledge I have. Some have more, but there are very few of us. There are a few who have migrated from the clinical neurologic area into the cosmetic area.
Mm-hmm. It's an interesting transition, but you can really see how medically and experience-wise, how it's a fairly smooth transition for you.
It's really improved the quality of my life. It's much more fun. It's far more enjoyable. I don't have to deal with insurance companies. I don't have to deal with Medicare. I just have to deal with clients, really, rather than patients, because they're not sick. They're coming in just because they want to make some things better. It's a totally different set of expectations. But it's a lot more fun and it's much more relaxed than it was in clinical practice.
It's a nice way to end a medical career when you think about it.
It is. It's not nearly as financially rewarding. I made more money just because it was much higher volume, but this is much more fun. And if I wanted to, I suppose I could be very busy, but I really don't want to be. I am semi-retired, a couple of days a week, and I'm happy with that.
So let me ask you about your childhood. So a couple of incidents in your childhood that you think made you into the person you are today.
The first incident would be, I guess, my interaction with other children of my contemporaries at summer camp. And you have to learn how to deal with other people without that close-knit protection of family and safety of my local community, which I was very accustomed to. Now, in retrospect, a lot of the kids I went to camp with were of similar background to me, but they still came from different places, and they brought slightly different perspectives to the world and how it functions. You have to learn how to live in a bunk with a dozen or more people of your age, and find out that, well, gee, here I can't just do what I want to do. I kind of have to do what the group wants to do. I was a little fearful of this at the beginning. I was pretty shy when I started, but eventually I started taking leadership roles, at least in some areas. I was not confident at all in my ability to do it, but I found that I was able to become a leader, to become a head of at least a small subgroup of my friends in camp activities, and that I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the responsibility. The other thing that I wanted to mention, and that I know that a lot of people deal with, was bullying in junior high school and earlier high school. Today, bullying is a big deal. Everyone gets all over it, and administrators come down on the people doing it. All sorts of punishments involved. But back then, when I was young, it was almost entirely ignored by administration. And just the fact that you were being subject to bullying was a sign of weakness, almost regardless of response. So that knowledge by other people invited more personal attacks. And at some point you have to fight back, which I did. At that point, the bullying kind of receded into the background. That taught me to be more active than passive. And then being more active, I became more rebellious. And even this time, we're talking about the 60s, which was a very active, rebellious time, which I embraced. So, very much unlike the way I am now, an elderly conservative member of society. I was anything but then. I sought out activities and cultural values that were diametrically opposed to those of my parents and my community, my immediate local community, which was fun. And bumping heads with the school administrators, that was also fun and challenging. We had big deals like dress code. Wearing jeans to school was not done, and that we did, and that was a protest. I was also an honor student, so my bad behavior was often swept under the rug, which turned out to be good, because otherwise I would have been in significant trouble. But from that rebelliousness, well, I will say that rebelliousness that I had, by the time I was a senior, it was the rule of behavior rather than the exception. Now I was no longer different. Now I was doing what everybody else did, which was very confusing because it was tough to choose how to behave. You can't be a rebel when everyone's a rebel.
Right.
Yeah. So then you have to start learning how to deal with group responsibility as well as your own individual goals.
That's great. It's interesting how you would start with a camp experience, which was also a really unnerving experience for me when I was a kid and I went to this camp and had a similar experience. And the whole thing about bullying at the time, although people are maybe all over it in the news or in rhetoric, they aren't necessarily in terms of being able to deal with it or to teach children how to be inclusive as an antidote to bullying. And that's just only starting now, really. Yes. But it is a significant formative experience for many people who are leaders, because if you have no obstacles to overcome, you don't develop the resilience and discover where those latent talents were for leadership that have to do with overcoming significant obstacles like being bullied.
I agree. My life wasn't all that difficult otherwise. It was a good neighborhood in the center of Long Island. We weren't under any particular threat from the external environment, but internally the threats were very real.
Yes.
Within the people that I had to associate with every day. So yes, and when you're young, of course, that's a huge obstacle. It's a mountain climb.
It feels very big when you're that young, and looking back in retrospect, it seems small. But at the time, it's pretty much all-consuming.
It's the focus of your life. It is your life at the time. So
also interesting what you had to say about rebelling and then realizing that really if you want to get anything done, you're going to have to collaborate and cooperate, and that actually is a much bigger task than simply saying, I'm not doing this and I'm not doing that and I'm doing this my way.
Right. You can lead by rhetoric, right? You can lead by example, but unless you have a group of people who are willing to share your beliefs, the leadership is not going to be effective. Because you'll be alone. You won't have people following you. And I didn't want followers. I really wanted to be part of the group. I wanted to be part of people who were my peers and who, we could share similar life experiences. You want friends. You want to be around people that you can deal with and that can deal with you.
Right.
That's not an easy thing to find sometimes.
Right. Similar beliefs or similar values or both?
Both. Yeah, often one is mutually exclusive of the other, right? Again, when you're growing up in a community of similar people, in the center of Long Island back in the 50s and 60s, we were not racially or ethnically diverse, other than the fact that my neighborhood was half Jewish and half Catholic or half Italian, which means that no matter whose house you ate dinner at, you'd have a good meal, and there were no thin children in my neighborhood. But that was as much diversity as you experience until you get on in high school, takes in a little bigger area, and you start getting a few people who are, not of the same race, not of the same ethnic background, and that's a little more of an experience. And then you move on to college, at university, and then all of a sudden you run into a whole bunch of people that are very different.
Right, and then you start to question if the things that you've believed all along are actually applicable to other people outside of your own group.
Correct. College, again, or university, that was that experience for me. It was quite a comeuppance in several ways. The first, again, is meeting people of such diverse backgrounds, different countries, different races, different beliefs, and all of us being thrown together in one big melting pot and having to get along. The other thing, I was always one of the more intelligent kids in the class, honor classes, so on. And then when I got to college, it was humbling to find out that, wow, there are all of these people that are so much smarter than I am. It was a shock. It was difficult to deal with. And it was even worse in medical school. I did manage to finish in the top third of the class, but there were a lot of smart people. Very, very, very intelligent. And I did not think I could match up to them. I hope they felt the same about me.
Yeah, it's that experience of going from being a big fish in a small pond to being a fish in a pond where you recognize that you're not as big as you thought you were.
When your little pond drains out into a big lake or an ocean. And yes, it was very much what it was. It was shocking.
But that is also another sign of leadership, is to be able to be humbled by that experience rather than to just go on believing that one is at the top of the heap all the time without any proof to back it up. Let me go to the next question, which was about groups that you were born into. So, the groups that you were born into, what would you say has influenced you? I mean, those groups can be anything. They can be, a racial group is not so much an identity, but it can be. Social class is, religion is for sure, ethnicity or ethnic background, language, religion, profession, all of those things can make a difference.
I'm sure that much of my personality was shaped by the values of my local community. I didn't want it to be. Even when I was younger, I really didn't want to accept all these values. I really think what affected me to the greatest degree was my immediate family, white Jewish parents, but they never acted in a way that was opposed to other racial groups. They never acted in a manner to suggest that we had a superior religion. It just wasn't like that. It was part of it. Mostly it was their work ethic that influenced. I really didn't know it at the time, but now I can see how closely I followed their example.
So now that you're looking back on it, what would you say? Because people tend to always talk about their family, which is great. And I do want to hear about the influence of your parents, but about the surrounding community. What about growing up in a Jewish community? What kinds of values would you have unconsciously adopted that maybe later you questioned and maybe continued to believe or didn't?
Yeah, well, certainly questioned. Again, I was sort of brought up with two backgrounds. I wasn't kidding when I said the neighborhood was half Jewish and half Italian. And that's what it was. So I had a lot of exposure to Catholic immigrants, Jewish immigrants, some people that have been here for several generations. Half of my friends were Italian, Catholic, the other half were Jewish. I think of those more as cultures than religions.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Because the religious practices really never were a significant part of our lives. It was something we had to do, and everyone did out of obligation to their parents. But I never thought of religion as a religion. I thought of religion as a culture. And the cultural values were good. The cultural values were actually very similar. The belief in self, the belief in family, the belief in the honor code, and the belief in the work ethic.
What is the honor code?
Well, that when you say that you're going to do something, you do it. You don't lie to friends, you don't lie to family. When you make a promise, it's an obligation. A handshake arrangement in those days was a contract. When you set out to do something and you say you're going to do something, you do it. That was basically the honor system. Doing what you said you were going to do.
Right. So people can trust you because you're trustworthy.
Correct.
Which would be something you would have carried through in your practice. Otherwise, your patients would not have been calling you or asking you questions because they trusted you. I'm
almost anal about being truthful. I tend to believe people. If someone tells me something, I will believe them until I see a reason to not believe. It still shocks me when people lie. I won't say I don't ever lie. I'm no angel, but I sure try not to. I really go out of my way to try to be as truthful as I possibly can. And again, to live by that honor code that we had as kids. If you make a promise, you fulfill that promise. If you say you're going to carry out a task, you do so.
Right.
That's how I grew up. That's what I believe. And I just don't know any other way to do it.
Right. Which is a really great way to express it. It's quite quotable, actually.
Good.
So the next one is groups you chose to belong to. For example, you chose to belong to the medical profession.
Correct.
Part of the neurologist association, but that's professionally. But there might have been other groups that you chose to belong to as well. So from those groups that you chose to belong to, what would you say has affected your leadership and your style in the way you work with people?
This is going to be probably a little different than you might expect, but in college, when my socialization rapidly advanced from the high school level, I became affiliated with liberal and pretty far left-wing groups. I was actually one of the local student leaders of the nationwide university strike to protest the U.S. invasion into Cambodia in 1970 during the Vietnam War. At the same time, that year and the next couple of years, while in college, I worked summer jobs back home. One summer I worked for a county road crew. Another summer I worked as a mail carrier for the post office. These are among the most conservative organizations you could ever imagine. I had to take my college experience with radicalization and flip it 180 degrees to learn from the experience of conformity, because you have to toe the line. It was very interesting. It taught me how to deal with people on a lot of different levels. The word manipulation is a bad word. I know it sounds unpleasant, but that is what you learn to do. You learn how to manipulate your situation, you learn how to manipulate the system. Particularly when you're working for the government, you learn how to manipulate the system. Manipulating people, that may not be the exact correct term, but you are in a way. You are trying to move them from their position to a position closer to yours. And my conceptualization is the essence of leadership. As I got older, I became much less polarizing and more congenial. Learned how to more gently urge people to accept what I believe to be correct behavior in a certain situation. And this is something that became essential to my doing the job as a physician. I was able to gain my patients' trust and belief.
So going back and forth between those two extremes, sort of extreme right and left, you learned to find a way that would speak to people and influence and persuade them gently.
Yes, as gently as possible.
In response to the situation, because sometimes gentle doesn't work, and
Correct.
Sometimes abrasive doesn't work. I would call that reading your reality. You read the reality of the system in which there were agents who could change or simply resign themselves to the fact that nothing could be done, or do a workaround. And then you also read the reality of people's variety of responses, yes, and then made a decision based on what you saw. And lots of times people get into trouble when they just go, this is what I believe, and therefore I am doing this. They haven't read the reality. They haven't
Right.
responded to the context.
Correct. And all people do that. You have an initial response to a situation. If you don't have any control, then very often that response will blurt out the response. Typically, it's going to be the wrong response because it's emotionally charged and it's not thought through. So learn how to step back, pause, think, then respond. It gives you a chance to formulate a better response, express yourself more clearly and in a way that's less polarizing.
Yes.
That is basically what I learned from living on the two edges of the universe throughout my first few years of college.
So a little follow-up to that. Did you adopt anything? I mean, you learned for sure, but did you adopt anything? You must have. I mean, there's got to be something from the culture of being a neurologist that you would have adopted into who you are.
Yes.
I mean, I learned to speak French when I was an adult, and I adopted aspects of the French-Canadian culture into my life, and others I didn't adopt. So, is there something you actually changed as a result of associating with different groups that you chose to belong to?
It's obviously a difficult question. I would say that, from living with so many different extremes, such radical views and then with such conservative views, you end up coming to the middle. You draw out from that experience. You start off afraid when the pendulum swings to the opposite, being angry and outspoken, and then it sort of settles down in the middle. I think that's called being an adult. You learn how to behave like an adult in adult situations.
Well, let me try a slightly different approach. So marriage, for example, to have a long and successful marriage requires actually adopting something from the other person's background to respond to them. Not everything, but some things. So I would say in my marriage with my husband, it's been 40 years. I certainly changed some aspects of my personality pretty much radically in response to my husband. And he has done the same in response to me. And I would say that comes from our background. So I'm a risk taker. I'm going to go out there and I'm going to be out there, canvassing for something and embracing the difficult stuff and be personal about it. And my husband is not. He's the opposite. He's, what's traditional? How can we follow this? What's already been done? What's prudent? What's fiscally responsible? And so we have learned to adopt those things from each other because otherwise we wouldn't get anywhere as a married couple. So would you say in marriage that anything has changed as a result of your interaction?
Just about everything. Marriage is a continual adaptation. Now, I was married 31 years. My wife passed away in 2005. But we were married continuously for 31 years, which is still a long period of time. Yes, you have to make adaptations constant in order to survive in a marriage. And for the marriage to survive, means opinions on everything, from my practice to community interaction to world politics to what we want to watch on television. We didn't always agree. Very often we didn't agree. So you have to learn how to compromise. And in the act of compromising, you change. Those compromises are not just short-term. Those are long-term compromises, which means you have to incorporate them into your personality, or else every day is going to be a conflict.
Right.
Every day is going to be a conflict within yourself, even if you're not having direct conflict with your spouse. Internally, you're going to be at war with yourself because you're behaving one way, you feel another way. So either you're in constant turmoil or you adapt. You change over time. So your views become more similar to that of your partner, and your views become more similar to yours.
Right.
By the time you've been married for 30 years, you pretty much know what the other one's thinking, know what the other one's feeling, know how to anticipate it, and very often share the same thoughts and feelings.
Yes. So let me ask you about temperament
Okay.
and personality. So temperament being what you're born with, but really isn't very malleable. And then personality, which is malleable because of experience and because of education and because of making choices and then responding to how those choices turn out for you. What would you say you were born with temperament-wise?
I was very outgoing as a young child and fairly easygoing. But again, I didn't have a lot of obstacles within my family. My father worked 2 or 3 jobs at any given time in both law and accounting. My mother was a professional artist who gave professional art classes in the home 5 days a week. They were constantly working, yet they had time for us. I didn't know that we weren't wealthy because I never wanted for anything. They always provided. There was always good food on the table. I had all the toys I wanted. I had everything I wanted. So life was pretty easy. I guess in the school environment, when you first start making contacts with people who don't necessarily agree with you, my initial response was to back away, was to not cause conflict, to be afraid of causing conflict. When I found out that didn't work at all, then I would seek out conflict. So my temperament now is obviously an ongoing process of integrating all these different experiences and marriage and being a parent and dealing with my medical practice and patients to where I am now. And I consider myself, again, fairly easygoing. I don't fly off the handle, certainly not at patients and not at employees, unless something really egregious. My children may not agree. They may say that I can get pretty explosive, and I can. That's definitely there. but it has mellowed a lot over time because it never works being abrasive. It just doesn't. All it does is make things more difficult. It's so much easier to get people to work with you, follow your suggestions, if they find you easy to talk to and easy to deal with and are not afraid that you're going to bite their head off.
And if you also sometimes follow their suggestions.
Yeah, though that's something you can do. No, and I said this is interesting. Yes, of course I do. To someone whose opinion I respect, or even so, anyone who has a good idea.
Right.
Yes, I will definitely listen and incorporate that. Absolutely.
Well, it sounds like you kind of had these two things in your temperament right from the get-go, which was fear of conflict, but then the willingness to face something that you believed in or that you felt needed to be addressed in whatever way it took. And as you got older, you learned to mitigate that and just to round out the rough edges a bit, which became more your personality.
Yeah, correct. I think when you're young, there really is no subtlety. A 1-year-old or 2-year-old, they're going to say whatever they think and feel. Right? There's no subtlety involved, and there's no deception. They just come out and say it. As you get older, you find out you can't do that and function in normal society. So you learn how to adapt.
Right. So can you recall a time when you became aware that, I mean, you already explained one, which was when you went to school and realized suddenly everybody wasn't like you and didn't live the same way you and your family did. But have there been any as an adult where you just felt like, gee, I just realized now that I'm suddenly in a situation where what I thought was normal is not normal for everybody? Has that happened that you can think of at a time when you were an adult?
Well, that happens every time you move. When you change geography. Just moving from New York to Long Island to Philadelphia to the university was a significant cultural change. People were different. Then I moved to Texas, which is totally different than the Northeast in almost every way. The way people think and behave. This was, again, another major culture shock. One I was intellectually prepared for. I'd already visited here. I knew something about the area. I knew what I was going to be doing, where I was going to be living, so it wasn't as if we just, came in on the train with a bunch of hobos and had to find a place to set a tent. We knew where we were going, so that helped. But dealing with people who are brought up completely different from the way you were brought up was, and still is sometimes, a shock.
And have a different history.
Yeah, very different.
Yes.
Very different, very different. You may have no idea of some of the things that you assumed were commonplace knowledge. And that's always stunning and a little ridiculous. And then on the other hand, they'll say something or do something of which I have no knowledge. And they look at me like I'm the fool, which I am in that situation.
Sometimes it can just be a little thing. Actually, have a friend who's lived in several states and several provinces in Canada, and also in one Latin American country. And he said that the thing, when he was in Louisiana, the thing that always surprised him was the definition of barbecue. He said barbecue was digging up a bunch of crawdads and sticking them into a pot and boiling them. And for him, barbecue was grilling beef on a grill outside. And he was like, I don't know why I have so much trouble adjusting to this. I've been here for 5 years. I should just get over it, He goes, I just don't know why it always irritates me to have people invite me to a barbecue when I'm going, that's not a barbecue. Do you really know what a barbecue is?
That's still a big point of contention between Texas and Louisiana. We usually incorporate both. We will blacken fish in New Orleans style, but we'll also burn our burgers and hot dogs and steaks on the grill. One thing I'll never get used to those is a lot of people in Texas like steak. I hardly ever eat steak anymore anyway. When I do, I like it rare to medium rare. A lot of people in Texas like their steaks well done. picture John Wayne saying, "Burn one for me, Natty." And that's what they like. And I mean, for the life of me, I can't understand why someone would want to chew up, 8 ounces of shoe leather for dinner. But that's a cultural difference. You can't convince people otherwise. This is how they've grown up. This is what they know. That's a small example, but that is an example of a cultural difference that is irreconcilable and something you just have to learn to do.
I'm going to throw something at you that just for the fun of it. I don't know what you're going to think about this, but I think that as a doctor in society, not with your patients, because your patients are always throwing things at you that you're not expecting.
Oh, yeah.
But in society, people are not going to challenge you so much as try to do something that would appease you.
There was a time when I was growing up on Long Island, the doctor was the most respected member of the community. Not only did he make good money, but everyone looked up to the doctor. And all doctors took off Wednesday afternoon to play golf. I mean, this was the way it was for a doctor. Doctors today don't have nearly that level of respect, but I think we still have more respect than most professions. So within the medical community, if I'm working in a hospital or clinic, then as a doctor, I'm still top dog.
Yeah.
I'm still going to be the one who garners the most respect, the least arguments. I often have to encourage my employees to actively argue with me if they think I'm doing something wrong with the way I'm doing it, because I would like to know. I'm not an expert administrator or businessman. I would like to know if there's a better way to do it. They're afraid to because the obvious reasons is you don't go yelling at your boss. Employees that I had for 10 years or more would be much more comfortable doing that. And I loved that. I loved working with them because they would tell me when they thought something was amiss. Yes, as a doctor within the employment arena, certainly we are the most highly respected in the community. Out in the rest of the world, there's a lot of people who don't like doctors anymore. So that level of respect, the deference that I was used to receive 20, 25 years ago is really not there as much yet. And of course now I'm okay with that because I'm sorry. It's hard when you've been given respect and you've been in charge and you always have people move out of your way when you walk down the halls. It's difficult to deal with times that doesn't happen. I remember a professor in medical school told me it takes 6 months to get used to being called doctor, and it takes another 6 months to get used to being called mister. And it's true. It's true. Once, as a doctor, you are a more powerful person. You are defined as a person of power.
You adjust to the status and you act within that authority. So even if people don't know what you do for a profession, they sense your competence and your keen intellect and your approach to solving problems.
Yeah, I'd say confidence in your problem-solving ability.
Yes.
The problem with many physicians, maybe most physicians, is that because we are attributed such a lofty status, we have people's lives in our hands every day. We develop a kind of arrogance. Now you need some arrogance to make life and death decisions. You have to have a strong belief in yourself and in your process and in your knowledge and in the tools you have at hand. So some arrogance is an absolute necessity, but very often I see that carried well beyond the medical realm out into the rest of the world, where we have no more right to be arrogant than anybody else. We don't. And that I've always disliked that, which is why I don't have a whole lot of doctor friends because of that arrogance.
Maybe I'd say you need to have confidence and the ability to make decisions, to
Absolutely.
make it swiftly and accurately, and to make adjustments if you've made a mistake quickly, right?
Yes, yes, and we do.
Yeah, I'm not sure arrogance plays into that. I would say it's confidence and decision-making skill. Arrogance goes over the top into assuming that you are omnipotent, and that's just, I don't see how you can make good decisions in that state of mind.
I see doctors who behave like that all the time.
Yeah.
I'm constantly around them, and I do see that kind of behavior. And yes, it does impair your decision-making ability because assuming you're always right doesn't give you any room to question yourself. It doesn't allow you to rethink a position.
Or learn.
Absolutely, which I think is essential to medical practice.
Yeah, and willingness to question the status quo because medicine really is always evolving. And without being willing to question what was even a previously held belief a month ago, how can we advance, really?
Yeah, absolutely.
But I see that in all the professional associations, people staking their claims instead of just learning.
I'm sure you're right, but I don't know their professions intimately. I only know mine. I wouldn't be surprised at all if it's the same problem in every profession.
Right. A sense of entitlement is always dangerous.
Yes, and that's what it is. That's probably a better term. But I mean, I really do see arrogant behavior in it. But yes, a sense of entitlement is probably a better way to describe it.
It's just threw it out, but it doesn't really matter how you describe it. We both know what we need. So we're getting close to the end of the interview, and I always like to ask people, like, let's say you were in the reverse position of being in a place where you're requesting employment from somewhere else. So you're not the person who's hiring, but rather someone who is going to be employed. But what would make it easier to work with you? What would the employer need to know about you?
About me, or about in general? About employers in general?
About you personally.
About me. Mm-hmm. Okay. Talk to me.
Yeah.
I want to talk to you. I want to hear what you're saying. And while most of the time I'm going to have a tendency to be forming my responses as soon as you start speaking, which is what people do. Try to listen. I'm going to try to listen to you. I want you to actually listen to me when I talk. My responses may be different than what you anticipate. So that doesn't mean that they're right or wrong, just different. But accept it, listen, evaluate it, incorporate it into your behavior if you feel that it is appropriate to do so. Adapt and change. Things are constantly changing. When I need someone I'm working with to do something different, I need them to be able to do that. So that's a very important skill. Don't be afraid of changing. Change isn't bad. Sometimes it can be. But change that's carefully thought through is usually a good thing. So be willing to adapt and change.
Right.
The last thing is that I would say, when talking to others, talking to me, talking to the other employees, talking to any of the people you interact with, keep it simple. Using big words shows off how intelligent you are, but all it does is drive people into a shell. It drives them away from you. It's not an adaptive behavior. Keep it simple. Speak plainly, clearly, and simply.
Would you say that's also the way you managed other people?
That's how I tried to. Again, in medicine, it's tough. Sometimes there's no way to describe something other than with technical language, no matter how much you try, because some things are so complex that the technical language is necessary. But yes, most of the time, I would try to simplify a problem as much as possible without oversimplifying it to the point where it actually changes its quality. If you can communicate something simply, if you communicate something in a way people can understand, with examples, with comparison, analogy, or any way that you can find to communicate an idea, they're going to benefit more from your treatment. People get better if they feel good about the person treating them. There's a huge placebo effect involved, and it's a real effect. My patients have to believe in me, or I can't treat them effectively. And they can't believe in me if they can't understand what the heck I'm talking about.
Right.
So I have to be able to communicate, and it has to be simple, basic, but accurate. And that's not easy to do, but that's what you have to do in order to communicate.
Right. That's very difficult to do, in fact. Is there anything else you'd like to say? Did this interview make you think of something else?
Oh gosh, Maria, I think we pretty much touched on everything as part of the leadership aspects of what I do. I will say that changing your life, completely changing what you do, me retiring 2.5 years ago and just doing cosmetics, was a big step. It makes you nervous. Very nervous. Anytime that you're putting yourself in financial and professional risk by taking a totally different tack. But it's also very fulfilling. So again, I think people to not be afraid of change, embrace it, think it through first. Right? Change for its own sake is destructive, not beneficial. But change in the direction you're going, and if you have good reason to do so and you've thought it out, is probably the right thing to do. This was the right thing to do for me. I'm not making anywhere near as much money as I used to make, which was not that much compared to what it used to be. But again, that's insurance companies. Now I don't have to deal with that. My life is so much better, even if I didn't make another dime for the rest of it, because I don't have to deal with all the stress that I had within the medical field, the Medicare insurance companies and so on. So my choice for me was a good one because it significantly reduced the amount of stress I had.
I think that in the United States, the stress from the medical insurance system and the bureaucracy involved is hugely understated. I'd say it's probably the biggest stress of every medical professional that I have met in the U.S. And also this constant threat of litigation is just it's beyond what's humanly tolerable.
And that's been an accelerating process over the last 30 years. About 25, 30 years ago, when we lost control of medicine physicians. We had control of everything. First, 5 years of when I was in practice after residency. We controlled everything the patients did. When we ordered a test, it was done. There was no argument. There was no fight. What we said was how it was done, and things were done well, except for a few people who abused the situation, took advantage of it, made vast sums of money, but ruined it for everybody else because it became obvious that we couldn't police ourselves. We couldn't get these people out of practice.
No professional association can police itself, really.
Well, we certainly could. I would absolutely agree with that. So other people stepped in, managed care organizations, governmental agencies. Now we have no control at all. And having no control of your life is how people become angry and depressed. That's why a lot of physicians are not happy. 30 years ago, Canadian physicians were rushing down here to practice because you couldn't make money in Canada, you couldn't make money here. Now, I think that trend is gone and it may have reversed because nobody wants to practice in such a difficult environment. It takes all the fun out of it. So now I have the fun back again, and I can't worry about what the income is going to be, but at least it's enjoyable. I love what I do, and that's really all that matters.
It really matters to love what you do. It's significant. And so I'm usually at this point, we're at the end of the interview. I ask people if there's something they'd like to promote. It can be a business, it can be a philanthropic endeavor, it can be a passion that they particularly have, or it could be a word of advice. So would you like to promote something here in this spot that you have?
I don't want to promote the business. Okay? I don't think this is the right forum for that. Although if you want to send me all your business, please do so. I'll give you my phone number. But that's not. I really don't want to do that. Really, about the only thing I'd really like to emphasize to people is, I think the thing we just went over when you asked me what I would tell a potential employee, how to deal with other people. I mean, to learn to listen. If you can just learn to listen to what other people are saying, doesn't mean you have to agree. Doesn't mean you have to believe. Listen. Think about it. Some people's ideas are worth listening to. Listen to what other people are saying. Incorporate it into your beliefs if you feel that it has validity, and go forward from that point. Practice your communication skills is the most important thing in the world.
Well, that is great advice. So thank you so much. And I really appreciate your time and your thoughtful responses, which were wonderful.
Thank you.
So, and that brings us to the end of our interview with Dr. Hal Kurlander. It's been really enjoyable to speak with you today, and I very much appreciate it. So I'm wishing you a wonderful rest of the end of the day, and I'm looking forward to putting everything together so the audience can hear the podcast and enjoy it.
Well, thank you, Maria. I enjoyed it a lot too, and I appreciate your time.
Learning to deal with other people and taking the middle road is how Dr. Hal Kurlander characterizes his life as a neurologist and most recently as a facial aesthetics specialist. He talks about his life growing up initially sheltered within two cultural communities, Jewish immigrants and Italian Catholic immigrants, and then moving into an experience of opening to the world and the diversity of his patients. Hal Kurlander's values of truthfulness and trustworthiness come through his life story from the time he was very young and continue to the present. The experience of constantly negotiating his two conflicting tendencies to alternately avoid conflict and face it head on helped him to realize how important it was to consider the context of people he was in conversation with and the goal of having both sides work together for the best healing environment. During the interview, Dr. Kurlander speaks openly about the difficulty of getting others, particularly staff, to speak honestly and frankly to a doctor who is consistently held in esteem and authority. He also speaks to the feeling of losing status in society when one is used to people automatically giving space to approaching doctors whenever they come through the hallway. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Dr. Hal Kurlander and that some aspects of his story really resonate with yours. Remember that our podcast exists to help people understand each other across difference and make friends through mutual human experiences. Help us reach a wider audience by telling your friends about the Culture and Leadership Connections podcast. If you have ideas for speakers or feedback on the podcast, you can send an email to marie@shiftworkplace.com or leave your feedback on our Work and Culture Facebook page. Thanks for listening, and may cultural connections continue to broaden, deepen, and inspire your world.